Boldwood presents The Housemate, written by Nina Manning and read by Helen Keeley. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Prologue. I crouch under the table and desperately try to control my ragged breathing. How the hell did I end up here? Curiosity or just pure bloody-mindedness? I think back to the simplicity of my life before all this. I was on a path to recovery. Things had become a little easier. I had my routines, life had a structure. Now all of my senses are working on overdrive. I'm thrust back to my cognitive behavioral therapy classes, and so I begin to think outside of myself to distract from the fear and panic. The 5-4-3-2-1 technique. Right, let's do this. Okay, 5 things I can see. A chair leg, a table leg, a length of brown and orange tablecloth, matted and greasy at the corner, a dent in the wooden floor, where something heavy had been dropped, a small handmade wooden bear the size of my hand, wearing a Hessian jacket. 4 things I can touch. Stay calm, stay calm. The hard floor beneath my knees, sweat on my forehead, a sticky patch next to my knee where someone has dropped some jam or something similar, a cut on my right leg. 3 things I can hear. A clock ticking, a fan oven cooling, footsteps. I hear footsteps. 2 things I smell. The putrid stench of vomit mixed with a cleaning product. 1 thing I can taste. There is blood in my mouth. I can taste blood. Instagram post. 25th of April, 2019. Wow, guys, I cannot believe a whole year has passed and I'm still here. I started this Instagram account because I enjoy cleaning and showcasing the results to other people, and you guys have shown me such great support. I feel grateful. 1 year in and I can hardly believe I have 1 million followers. And I love every single one of you, even though I can't see you in person. I feel all your love and support for what I do. I hope I can keep offering you great cleaning advice and that you will continue on this journey with me. Keep up the cleaning, guys. Mrs. C. Kiss. Hashtag cleaning, hashtag cleanstagrammer, hashtag anniversary, hashtag Mrs. Clean. 76,378 likes. Chapter 1. Now. I piled 4 coins on top of one another on the mantelpiece in my bedroom, turning each one a fraction, so the tiny indentations on the side of each coin were in perfect alignment. Then, I took 2 steps to the left and turned my attention to the locks on the window. I pulled each latch back and forth 6 times, until it was back on lock again. I headed to the bedroom door, let myself out, and shut it behind me. Once on the other side, I locked and unlocked the bedroom door 6 times. Then I left it locked and put the key in my back pocket. I walked down the stairs, silently counting each step as I descended, an even 10 every time. I arrived in the hallway and stole a brief look at myself in the oval mirror on the wall. Once upon a time, I would have relished showing off my taut cheekbones, delighted in the looks of intrigue people would give when they saw the greenness of my eyes against my pale skin, and thanked the hairdressers who would reliably inform me my shoulder-length black hair was the sleekest they had ever styled. I used to take time over my appearance, but these days I simply slipped my purple fabric tie-dye scarf around my neck and pulled on my boho slouch hat with a peak so I could shade my eyes and hide my face from the world. I pulled on my denim jacket over my slight frame, aware that I no longer worried about dieting. Any excess weight had fallen off years ago and had made no attempt to creep back on. I slid into my black Doc Martens and hit the concrete outside. I refrained from opening and reopening the front door due to the imposition on my housemates, even though it pained me not to do so. Instead, I closed it with 1 click. The act brought little satisfaction. so I compensated by walking only inside the lines of the pavement stones for a gratifying 10 steps. Today was one of my worst days. Usually I could get away with performing only 1 or 2 compulsions, but today I carried out my full repertoire of compulsions to ease the fear, to balance out the scales so nothing bad would happen. These compulsions, behaviours, are a force that come on quickly and sometimes from nowhere. It's a monster I must feed. I don't consider myself ill. It doesn't bring any inconvenience to my life. So long as I can just do some or all these small acts each day, everything will be okay. Nothing bad will happen. At least not again. This morning I had woken with a weight on my chest I couldn't shift. Today was the anniversary. 3 years had passed. Yet still here I was, a mere shell of the woman I once was. I looked back at the 5-bed, 3-story Victorian house I had been living in with 3 strangers for the last few weeks, and looked up at a cloudless blue sky and the tall, imposing buildings that cocooned me, protected me. People say they are drawn to the ocean to heal. The gentle lap of the waves are melodic and can repair your soul. But moving to a town like Richmond was the only option. Here there were no spaces wide enough to expose my true fears. When I heard the roar of an ocean wave, I would always hear the screams carried by the wind. Here all I needed to do was close my eyes and remind myself that I was safe and that everything was going to be okay. The sounds of the streets can be imposing. Sometimes I feel as though they are about to crush my skull. I have learned how to block things out. I choose to focus on one sound at a time and hear only that until it is no more. Then my mind weaves itself around another sound, and so it continues until I reach my destination. Of course, blocking out everything but one sound can often be mistaken for rudeness, nonchalant, snidey even. But sometimes you have no choice. When you have been screamed at enough times, are forced to hear it, that's when it's the hardest, when I am reminded of the past. Some sounds are supposed to be so beautiful, like the gentle tone of a child's voice, innocent and pure, yet they can fill my every fibre with terror. Walking is a sort of therapy. Anxiety struggles to hit a moving object, I was told during one of my steps to well-being seminars, just one of the forms of therapy I have had over the years, so I can carry on existing in the world. But is it worth it? When it's only yourself you have to keep alive? We aren't meant to be solitary creatures, despite my desire to keep hiding away from the world, and the person I can no longer bring myself to think about. I now share a house with 3 other girls, all students like me, but over a decade younger. I have to do as much as I can each day to keep face, to show my housemates that all is well, in the mind of Regina Kelly. Referring to myself as a student feels strange. It's been a long time since I last studied. This short introductory course will see me through to the end of the summer term. Then I begin my degree in September. I know my housemates watch me, that they see me repeat basic actions. A simple chore becomes a maddening act, repeated over and over until my mind is temporarily satisfied. But they stay quiet. Offer me a cup of tea as though everything is exactly as it should be, and there isn't a 35-year-old woman standing in our shared kitchen, turning the oven knob on and off an even amount of times. I am thankful for their ignorance, for turning a blind eye, especially on the harder days when the images fly through my mind like a freight train, and I feel the impenetrable dark clouds gather around me, as though I'm walking through a black fog. I had developed a routine already, in just a few weeks since I moved to Richmond upon Thames, and had quickly embraced the leafy borough with its parks and wide tree-lined avenues. I was so confined for so long, it was a relief to be able to walk to the local mews. I entered the cafe, and was hit by tantalising caramel and nutty aromas. Each day there was a slightly different scent in the air, but always the same member of staff was waiting for me, and that made me feel as though the world wasn't about to implode. The door made a loud sucking noise as it opened. My eyes scanned the room. It was busier than usual. I tried to spot Heather, the confident young girl who had been serving me the last few weeks, when someone pushed past me quite abruptly. I froze. Terror spiked through me. In the time I had been away, I had forgotten that I had to share walkways with others, that the small spaces I inhabited were not for my sole purpose only. When I realized I was safe and no one was trying to grab me, I looked up and saw a young man with a beard and a black puffer jacket holding a huge camera over his arm. I caught his eye, then quickly looked away. "I'm so sorry," he said. I knew he wanted to touch me, to emphasize his apology, but thankfully his hands were full. My arm still buzzed from the collision. I forced my gaze upon my destination and hurried towards the counter. Finally, I could see Heather, and my tense body slackened momentarily. Another piece of the day's jigsaw slotted into place. Heather smiled at me, but it was tainted with stress. "It's busy in here today," I said in her direction, hoping but knowing she would serve me. She nodded at me with wide eyes as she pulled cardboard disposable cups from a sheath of plastic wrapping. "Can I help?" A barista I had never seen before spoke at me in a monotone voice, and I quickly averted my eyes towards Heather. "I've got it, Tom," Heather called and winked at me as she finished wrestling with the cups and headed over to the counter. Tom shrugged and headed out onto the cafe floor and started clearing tables. "They've been shooting a TV commercial out there this morning. They were here at 5. They just stopped for a tea break, hence the chaos and the mess," Heather said as she pointed out towards the cafe floor. I glanced backwards, but the disarray made me quickly turn away and think happier, cleaner thoughts. "Usual?" she asked, heading to the coffee machine. She began making my preferred coffee, 1.5 shots of decaf coffee, half oat milk, half soya, heated to just before boiling with a shot of caramel. I smiled as I felt a flutter of satisfaction that I had already earned my status as a regular. As Heather worked on my coffee, I glanced back over my shoulder, out into the mews through the window. The low-hanging trees were aesthetically pleasing and framed the quadrangle like a picture, dappling the concrete with light and making it the perfect location for shooting scenes. There were cosy, well-presented shops, 2 cafes and a deli, where rich middle-class families hung out with other rich middle-class families at the weekend, all tending to their rainbow colour-cladded toddlers and young children in Bowden boots. At the weekends, I would have to jerk my legs aside as I heard the sound of a scooting child arriving precariously close to my shins, followed by low, unthreatening calls of "Jet" or "Milo" from a full-bearded father, wearing his baby in front of him like this year's latest accessory. I'd never purposefully avoid the mews on the weekend, but I found it a lot harder when there were more children around. Today was a Thursday, and it was pretty quiet, although I didn't need to be in a heavily populated area to hear the lingering echoes of children playing. It had been playing on loop in my mind for 3 years. Heather presented me with my coffee in a takeaway cup. I paid and thanked her and headed to the door, just as the TV crew and cast were beginning to spill back out into the mews. I pulled my cap down over my eyes and walked outside. In the street, the mews was buzzing with bodies. Some of the pavement had been cordoned off, and people were flocking to grab a glimpse of what they were shooting today. I jolted aside as a young lad on a scooter sped past me. The wheel of his scooter clipped my heel. Suddenly, my heart was drumming against my chest. I breathed in for 3 and out for 6. Just a short, sharp reset, as my therapist had taught me. As I leant into the wall, hoping I could morph into it, and that no one could see how small, seemingly inconsequential incidents could throw me off track. I pushed myself off the wall and went to walk on. But from the corner of my eye I caught a glimpse of a dark jacket and a black baseball cap, partially covering a face I thought I recognized. There was a shift in the atmosphere around me, like a surge of an electric current that was urging me to run. I felt my blood run cold, and my hands became clammy. The short, breathless episode a moment ago was a mere prelude to the terror that began to tear through my body. I began to walk at a pace. 3 smartly dressed women blocked my way on the corner. Their synchronized laughs sounded demonic in my ear as I skimmed past them. Their words morphed into the words I had heard him say so often. "You can't run away." I looked across the road again, but the man was nowhere to be seen. His words were evaporating and becoming the breeze around me once more. I slipped into the grocery shop, where I could take a moment to breathe and shake the image of the man out of my head. It couldn't have been him. I was safe here. I slowly sipped my coffee, whilst I perused the neatly stacked aisles. A jar of pickles was slightly out of line, so I nudged it back in with its suitors. The order restored a small amount of calm within me. I found my way to the next lane, non-perishables, toilet rolls, sanitary products, and the likes. I was just nudging some wet wipes back in line on the shelf when the sound of a raspy, raised voice alerted my attention to the till. I walked to the end of the aisle and saw a woman dressed in a dark overcoat, with her back to me. "You don't understand. I will return later, but I need this now." "I'm sorry. If I did this for you, then I would have to do it for all my customers. Please come back later when you have enough money." The cashier, a man in his 20s with a disproportionately long neck, was leaning forward and speaking quietly to the woman. I edged my way closer to the till, my hand already in my pocket, ready to be of assistance. I moved closer still, so that I was right behind the woman. Her clipped Eastern European accent was punctuating through the cashier's protests. "I'm really sorry," the cashier said again. I was so close behind the woman I could smell her perfume. It smelt like Parma violets. Tufts of peroxide blonde hair were poking from under her black bobble hat. The cashier's eyes met mine. The woman, who sensed his attention, wavered and turned abruptly. Her green eyes bore into me, urgent and accusing. She scowled, then turned and headed for the door, rushing through it and back out into the street. I approached the counter and saw what she had been trying to buy. It was a bottle of liquid paracetamol, the stuff you usually bought for kids. Just looking at it brought back a tsunami of memories of little hot heads and feverish nightmares, small bodies tossing and turning between the covers in the dead of night. Bodies that no longer existed in my world, yet I would never be free of their memories. I shook the images from my head and looked at the cashier. "How much?" As I stepped out of the shop, I scanned the area, desperately trying to see the woman. I spotted her, her head hunched, hands in her pockets, heading away from the mews. I increased my pace to a light jog, weaving in and out of people who seemed to be coming at me in waves, until I was next to her. "Excuse me," I said, as I arrived at her side. She jumped as though I had given her an electric shock. Then she turned to me with that same scowl. I handed her the bottle of paracetamol. "Please, take it. It's on me." She went to walk away and I touched her arm, instantly regretting the sort of action that would make me recoil. She stopped in her tracks. I edged my way back to her side and pushed the paracetamol bottle into the large pocket of her coat. She watched me, briefly looked up at my face, mumbled something in her native language and hurried on down the street. I stood amongst the sea of people and watched her as she disappeared around the corner. I didn't stop thinking about the woman all the way home. I played the scenario over in my mind. I imagined the child or children who were waiting for the medicine, what their ages were, and if they were boys or girls. I had wanted to follow her to see where she lived, to see why a woman who was shopping in an affluent area couldn't afford a bottle of paracetamol. The walk that was supposed to alleviate my racing mind had achieved the opposite. I counted the lampposts on the way home to calm my cluttered thoughts, tightening my grip on my shoulder bag until I reached the steps that led up to the house, that I was just coming round to the idea of calling home. I had become accustomed to a solitary existence, so being greeted when I arrived home was a real novelty. Yet again I was surprised that one of my 3 housemates was just reaching the bottom of the stairs as I came through the front door.
"Oh, hey,"
Minnie said as I closed the door behind me and began to unwind the scarf from around my neck. She eyed me in that way I was becoming familiar with. Being assessed was not unusual to me, and Minnie always looked slightly alarmed by my presence, as though she wasn't entirely sure what to do with me. I imagine she thought I was always on the edge and might do something crazy at any moment, my strange routines adding an almost nervousness to the house. Minnie, as her name suggested, was the youngest house member, at just 20. At 15 years her senior, I had yet to shake the notion that she saw me as a slightly crazy distant auntie, or cousin, rather than a housemate she could confide in. I took my cap off and hung it on the coat stand by the front door, ignoring the mirror, which in the past would have encouraged me to check my hair for post-hat frizz.
"I was just going to get some lunch."
Minnie began walking into the kitchen. "Okay." I followed her because I constantly felt the need to compensate for my inability to be that housemate, the one who sat up until dawn, chatting and giggling, offering to paint nails, plait hair, and listen to endless stories of near misses with the one. I tried to ignore the chaos of the kitchen and sat down at the huge table that could seat at least 8. I was still getting used to eating with others again, after spending so much time taking my meals alone. I was still struggling with the size and openness of the house. 5 bedrooms, a huge kitchen, 2 reception rooms, and 3 bathrooms between 4 of us. One lonely room had cocooned me for the last year, where sounds would arrive uninvited, an echo of an infant yelping or screaming. But always, I heard the cries. They say you never stop hearing them. I was forever alert, ready to run to the slightest whimper. Even in a house this size, there was nowhere I could hide that would drown out the sounds that ran through my mind on a loop. Minnie's uncle owned the property and let it out for a price that would choke a Yorkshireman but made London renters nod with enthusiasm whilst daring to utter the word bargain. I looked around at the kitchen, with its large surfaces and random scattered items, bleach, washing up liquid, and an array of utensils were out on the surface next to the sink, which was deep, white ceramic and stained with tea. The Aga was greasy, and a pan left over from breakfast was still perched on top of the insulating lid. The fat congealed to a sticky yellow mass. The huge wooden kitchen table had a general tacky feel to it that didn't seem to lift, no matter how many times it was wiped. Up until now, I had managed to not let the mess get to me, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could leave it. The lack of order in here brought everything to the surface. Even now in the kitchen with Minnie, I began to look around for something I could open and shut an even amount of times, to satisfy the monster who I knew would not rest. Perhaps if I offered to clean the kitchen. I imagined this as a way I could bring a little bit of me to the house. Up until now, I hadn't felt confident enough to take the initiative and show the girls some level of basic domesticity. I had little else to offer, in the way of sparkly wit or entertaining anecdotes about my day. I looked around and thought perhaps I could assert my role as the older and wiser housemate and draw up a cleaning rota. Perhaps I would be the one who would instill some basic home skills into these girls, something they would look back upon in later life, remember me and be thankful for. Minnie pulled open the fridge, and I caught a glimpse of the salad tray with its dying leaves stuck to the clear shelf and a mass of jars that had left rings that could be seen through the glass underneath. I averted my eyes. I didn't need to see it to know it was there. In the last few years, cleaning had become a compulsion, something I needed to do and do well. Looking around, I felt something new growing inside me, an uncontrollable need to cleanse the house from top to bottom. Minnie opened a tub of prawns in Marie Rose sauce, and emptied the contents over half an avocado. She left the remnants on the side and sat down opposite me on the kitchen table, giving me one of her half smiles, showing off her perfectly pinched pink cheeks and petite lips. I could see why her parents named her Minnie. With her sleek black hair, she was like a perfect china doll.
How are you finding it all? Are you feeling settled?
She asked, before she took a mouthful of her salad. A little sauce spilled from her lips, and she emitted a squeak like a small animal, then dabbed her mouth with a piece of kitchen roll. Settled. I pondered over the word, which had so many connotations. I didn't think I would ever feel settled. In fact, I was forever teetering on the edge of uncertainty. But I imagined Minnie was curious to know if the bed was comfy enough and had I found enough bathroom space to keep my toiletries. I am now, yes. You know what it's like. It takes a while.
And your course, textiles, isn't it? Has it started yet?
Minnie reached over and edged yesterday's newspaper closer to her. It was open on the crossword, where someone had abandoned it halfway through. Yes. Next week after the Easter holidays, I said, trying to sound keen. But I felt burdened with guilt at being able to start again, learning a new skill which I hardly felt I deserved. But I needed the distraction. I also needed something to spend my money on. The money that was fairly mine, an even split down the middle. It was what I was entitled to. So I took it. There hadn't and wouldn't be any lavish expenditures. I would simply exist with it. I had reached a point where I was functioning, and that was all I needed to do. I watched in awe as Minnie rapidly filled in the blank spaces of the crossword, with only a moment's pause after reading each clue.
Have you always loved art?
She asked. I thought back to my late teens, when most girls my age were out experiencing everything they could. By the time I was 20, I had already become a mother. I reached for a stray paper napkin and folded it over 6 times until it was a neat, tight, square wad. I loved design at school, I said, pressing the napkin square down until my finger turned a deep shade of pink. I noticed Minnie staring at my finger, and I quickly pushed the napkin away. I knew she saw what most did, a woman with a bunch of obsessive compulsions. What she didn't know was what I did to become her. Chapter 2. Then. The room was filled with dancing bodies, and people slouched in sofas and chairs. A block of 3 disco lights flashed beneath a makeshift DJ booth, where a pale, skinny guy with a ginger afro was mixing vinyl records. I looked across to my right, and my eyes stopped on a guy a few feet away. I could tell he was older than me, as he danced amongst the chaos, busting out some moves to a Michael Jackson hit. There was something alluring about him, something about the way he smiled. He had a slight gap in his teeth, but it suited him. He wore a faded black t-shirt. His tanned arms were muscly with wisps of light blonde hair. His hair was cut short, and I wanted to run my fingers across it, to feel the brittle follicles on my fingertips. I watched him for what felt like forever, until finally his eyes met with mine. We shared a moment, and in that look was a sentiment that said, I know you. Even though we hadn't met before, it was as if we had known each other all our lives. When he finally found his way over to me, he began the conversation as though we were halfway through it. That vodka won't drink itself, you know. He pointed at the full bottle next to me. I had bought it from the off-licence on the way here, along with a bottle of Diet Coke. But I didn't fancy drinking either of them. It had been another friend's birthday 2 nights previously, and I had gone at it pretty hard, so was still feeling the after effects. I was only at this party because I was staying with my cousin, 40 miles from my house. He rang on the off chance and said one of his friends was having a party and did I fancy coming up and staying the night. There was a moment when I thought to myself, I won't go. I'll stay at home and keep an eye on Mum. My mum was having another one of her turns. The black dog, as she preferred to call it, had come back to visit. I thought the term was more depressing than depression itself. I would be turning 18 in the summer, but I would probably still stay living with Mum. I needed to keep an eye on her, even though all she did was sleep during these episodes. But there was another part of me that was interested to go to the party, to see what the night could bring. I was still young and ready to grab what life offered with both hands. And if I was being totally honest, I was looking for love. I had grown up watching too many films. Sleepless in Seattle, When a Man Loves a Woman, Indecent Proposal. Mum would always have a love film on, any time of the day or night. She referred to them as her weepies. I never saw her weep at them, though. Instead, by the end of the film, she would have more of a scowl on her face, as though she knew she had been dealt an injustice. But still she played them. And I watched. And I learned that no matter what life threw at you, alcoholism, bankruptcy, or the death of spouse, there would always be someone else there to save you, to pick up all the pieces and put you back together again. Standing at this party with this stranger in front of me, I felt as though I had been saved. I told him that I didn't fancy drinking the vodka, that I was feeling a bit worse for wear. Then I laughed and told him that all I actually wanted was a cup of tea. "Then that is what you shall have," he said, with a twinkle in his eye. We left the party that I had been at for just over an hour together, hand in hand. He told me to call him D. "Everybody does," he said. He took me to a McDonald's and bought me a cup of tea and a donut and told me anecdotes of nights out and holidays that made me feel like I had barely lived a life at all, which, of course, I hadn't. "What will folk think when I tell them I took a girl to McDonald's on a first date?" He tucked into a burger with fries, apparently not conscious of eating in front of strangers. "So this is the first date?" I asked quietly, as I attempted to sip scalding hot tea from a polystyrene cup as graciously as I could. "Many more to come, I hope." He raised his eyebrows and flashed a cheeky grin, exposing that tooth gap. He dropped me off at my cousin's house an hour later. Time seemed to stand still as his lips met mine, unfurling all of my senses. I could smell alcohol on his breath, but beyond that there was a scent about him that was hypnotic. He left me with my knees weakening and a promise of another date. "Once I've shown you a good night out and how I treat a lady, you'll never want to let me go," he called, as he walked off down the path and back to the waiting taxi. I watched the car drive away and felt the pang in my gut. This was just like the films I had watched. I was already missing him. Chapter 3. Now. I was alone in the house again. I still had hours to go to make it to the end of this day. I still felt the tension rising through my body, the thoughts layering themselves one over another, each becoming entwined with the next. I heard a voice I recognized. I looked around the hallway, where I was standing alone. "Don't do it," the voice said. I was being pulled back in time. I looked behind me again. "Don't do it," they said. And suddenly they were there with the same kindness in their eyes. Behind their veil of sadness, they too were trying to overcome their difficulties. And they wanted me to try as well. If I just unlocked and locked the front door and even 6 times, everything would be okay. No one would get hurt. No one would die. Why couldn't they just understand that? I felt the actual presence of someone behind me, a voice that was very real, not from the past. I spun around and there was Sophia, another housemate. She had put her shoulder-length blonde curly hair in bunches and was wearing dungarees. She looked like a children's TV presenter, and reminded me of all those years I spent hours watching children's TV programs.
That one's a bit tricky, huh?
She smiled at me. Her blue eyes twinkled. I realized I had found my way to the front door, and my hands were on the doorknob. I felt a wave of shame flood over me. Sophia was the eldest of the 3 housemates, but still so young at only 23. I was drawn to her more than the other 2. Yet I still felt like a small child who had been caught with their hand in the cookie jar. The noise of the door must have brought Sophia from her room, where she spent an inordinate amount of time studying hard. She had told me, on the first night I was here, how studying had been inbuilt into her from a young age by her parents, who were both head and shoulders above everyone else in their chosen careers. I knew they put too much pressure on Sophia to be better than she was. Sophia was being kind and patient with me, a trait I had recognized in her from the first day. But I was sure all 3 girls would be sick of me once they began to hear me opening and closing doors over and over. But I was beginning to enjoy being around others again. I had spent far too long solitary. I was glad Sophia had appeared when she had. When someone else was in the house, it felt nice. It felt right. Perhaps I could start to appreciate having someone there for me again. I had pushed away everyone from my past a long time ago. I thought about calling them from time to time, my cousins or even my mother. I was an only child. My father had passed away when I was just 15, so I had the guilt of the unanswered calls from my mum to deal with. In the 3 years that had passed, I still couldn't bring myself to pick up the phone and reach out, even though so many people had texted me after it happened, telling me they were there for me. What was the point of reaching out to those whose lives were so far removed from me now? It would only stir up all the memories. People were very good at forgiving, but I knew no one would ever forget what I did.
You have to just twist it like this.
Sophia leant in past me. I could smell her coconut conditioner, the one I had seen on the bathroom shelf on my first day in the house, and inhaled so I could get a sense of who I was going to be sharing a house with. I looked at Sophia's hand on the doorknob as she tried to demonstrate how sometimes the lock would get stuck. I smiled at her vain attempt to make my behaviour appear normal. "Thank you," I said, and I knew from the way her smile reached her eyes that she was genuine.
"Look, tell me to do one if you think I'm being rude," Sophia said. "As you still have a few days to go until your course starts, I wondered if you fancied a little project to keep you busy." We stood next to one another, outside the large green wooden summer house. It ran about 10 feet along the back edge of the garden, in front of the fence and hedge that divided the gardens. All along the side facing us were large floor-to-ceiling windows. The rest of the garden was square. A few small slabs of concrete passed for a patio just outside the back door. Then it was mostly grass with modest borders of small, easy-to-manage plants, with the summer house perched right at the top end. "It's such a great little unit. It seems a shame to let it go to waste just sitting there filled with junk. I thought maybe if you were not too busy and you fancied the challenge, you might enjoy emptying it out and giving it a spruce. We could all chip in for some new furniture or accessories. It could be a really nice spot to come and sit now it's getting warmer."
Sophia turned to me with a grimace.
"What do you think? I don't want to overload you."
"I'll do it," I said, with a small smile. Inside, I felt a wave of relief. Much like the kitchen, I'd had my eye on the summer house since I had arrived, but I hadn't wished to sound impertinent by offering to give it a once-over.
"Oh, wow. That's amazing. Really, the others will be so pleased. I'd love to do it myself, but my workload is fierce at the moment. I barely have enough time to eat and sleep."
"It's fine. It will keep me busy for a few days. Plus, the weather is picking up. I'll enjoy being outside."
"Great. Just chuck all the stuff we don't want on the lawn and I'll send a photo of it to Minnie's uncle and see what he wants to do with it."
"Well, no time like the present," I said,
as I headed back to the house to fetch marigolds, bin bags, and spray guns, feeling for the first time in a long time a flurry of enthusiasm and a sense of purpose. Once I was alone and inside the summer house, I felt the relaxation come in waves, but each time I acknowledged it, it dispersed, and the aggressive butterflies crept back into my gut. Cleaning was a welcome distraction and brought back a swell of relief. I looked around at the dusty interior of the summer house, with its stacked boxes and stuffy furniture. Sophia was right. This would make a nice place to hang out. I could imagine myself sat here on a warm day, reading or sketching some ideas. I began dragging the furniture outside. It was all old stuff that probably once belonged in the main house. It was just about good enough for a charity shop. Once I had dragged the last chair outside, I collapsed into it. It was a brown velour lounger with a chrome base and looked like it had come straight out of the 70s. I imagined once it would have been fashionable, but it had seen better days. I squinted up at the spring afternoon sun, and I allowed myself a moment to close my eyes. As I did, I felt a surge of tiredness engulf me. I opened my eyes and gulped in a breath. I looked around and tried to establish where I was. Looking up at the sky, the clouds had enveloped the sun. I felt a chill and grasped around for my cardigan, but it was still inside the summer house. I stood, slowly, trying to shift the fog in my head and reconnect with my surroundings. I turned back towards the summer house when I heard a tiny voice, saying something I couldn't quite make out. It seemed to be coming from the other side of the fence. It was the sort of sound that would skim past the eardrums of others, but the sound of a small child's voice was so familiar that it would never pass me by. The butter-like velvet tone carried by the slight breeze had me floored. It was as though I knew the voice. "Mama!" The word floated across the fence. Suddenly, I was no longer in a garden in Richmond, but miles away, in another time, in another place where I was reciting from a favourite book. The words come back at me, muddled and broken through a tiny mouth. I laughed because of the unadulterated joy as their words skipped along like a song. It was music to my ears, but a sonnet that was so painfully nostalgic, I wanted to crawl into a ball. The gut-wrenching reality hit me as I was snapped out of the daydream. That voice had gone and would never return. And the voice from across the fence, only a vivid reminder of the colossal mistake I was still repenting for. Up until now, I had not seen or heard anything come from next door, and my bedroom window looked straight into their garden. But I felt that I needed to get a look at the neighbours. I wondered if they had been away somewhere or perhaps had just moved in. I looked towards the end of the garden, and I could see the shrubbery parted as it curved to the right. Could there be a way into the neighbour's garden from ours? I wasn't ready to start crawling about on my hands and knees just yet, and I remembered there was a stepladder in the summer house. I set it up, as close to the fence as I could get it. Then I cautiously walked up. 1 step, 2, 3, until my head was just peeping over the fence. I listened with intent and anticipation for the child to show itself. My mouth dry, and my palms damp with sweat. Why did I torture myself like this? Maybe because today, the anniversary was so significant, and the voice sounded so familiar. A voice that would forever stay that way in my mind, because it never had a chance to evolve and change and grow. As I conjured up an image in my mind, the child appeared in the garden. A fleeting moment. He or she, I couldn't quite tell. Their hair was a shock of untamable brown curls, much like the ones I had tried to train, but to no avail. Yet there were those curls again, floating past me, as if time had rewound. The child seemed to coast past in slow motion, their feet just on the patio, heading for the patch of grass. Then suddenly, I saw a flash of blonde hair. A hand stretched out and grabbed the child's arm. The child threw their head back in protest. The innocent calls of, "Mama!" turned to a blood-curdling yell as they were dragged backwards and out of my sight. I heard a door slam so hard it ricocheted around my chest. And all I was left with was the echo of the child's screams. As I stood on the stepladder, the scream continued, but became fainter, as though they were falling. 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 My foot became air as I struggled to find somewhere to place it. Before I knew where I was looking up at the sky, with my leg twisted backwards and a sharp pain resonating from my ankle to my waist.
"Reggie, are you okay?"
I turned my head to my right, and Karen, my other housemate, was standing over me inquisitively, yet without too much concern in her tone or her face. She always had such a serious aura about her, from the way she dressed, always blue skinny jeans and long-sleeve t-shirts, to the way she wore her hair tied back so tightly in a neat, sleek ponytail, it seemed to pull the skin up from around her eyes. "I think so." I looked up at the stepladder. I had slipped just 3 steps. I could feel tenderness on my shin, where I knew a large bruise would form later.
"Well, okay, then let's get you up."
She reached out her hand, which I ignored, pushing myself up instead. I went to put the weight on both legs, and pain shot through my ankle. I sucked in my breath through my teeth.
"Right, okay, let's get you sat down, shall we?"
Karen said uneasily, and looked impatiently around before grabbing the lounger I had been sat on, when I fell asleep. I watched as she awkwardly manoeuvred it over to me, its weighty legs protesting against the overgrown grass. After painfully observing her efforts, I refrained from telling her I could have walked to it quicker.
"I see you've started on the summer house."
Karen took out a tissue and blew her nose.
"Bloody hay fever."
She wiped her nose and shoved the tissue into the back pocket of her jeans. I turned to look at the array of furniture scattered on the lawn. Yes, I was, and then I kind of got distracted. I sat down.
"Spying on the neighbours,"
she said, as though it was the kind of thing she expected from me. "Just interested?" I scuffed at the grass with my healthy foot.
"Well, their gardens aren't nearly as good as ours,"
she said. "Do you know much about the neighbours, then?" I tried to sound nonchalant. Karen shook her head.
"Not really. I've lived here for a year almost, and I haven't met anyone yet."
She sucked in a breath and closed her eyes, then let out a huge sneeze. Another tissue was ripped from a packet.
"Speaking from experience, I also think it's quite possible to live next door to someone and never, ever see them."
Karen dabbed her nose and pushed the wet tissue into her back pocket with the other one. "So, have you ever seen the neighbours on this side? Did you know they have a child?"
"I've never seen a child. This street is mainly professionals and students, not very family-friendly. I only know that information from Minnie's uncle. He rents out about 6 houses on this street."
Right. I remembered them all telling me this when I came to look at the house. I scratched my neck and looked around at the furniture scattered around on the grass. "I'll ring the charity shop to see if they can come and pick any of this up."
"Good idea. Fancy a brew?"
Karen began walking back to the house. "Yes, great." I hobbled through to the kitchen, and Karen presented me with a nettle tea at the kitchen table. I had stopped drinking real caffeinated tea and coffee years ago, believing that caffeine was the source of my insomnia. It took me many more therapy sessions before it was revealed to me that because my mind was in hypervigilant mode in the day, by night my brain was reminding me it wasn't safe to sleep.
"Shit, we're out of milk,"
Karen said, and went to head out of the kitchen door. "It's okay, I'll go." I stood up to test the pressure on my ankle. The pain had begun to subside. "No, stay, it's for my coffee. You've just got your tea." I needed to walk. The shock and stress of the fall and the child's voice and that image of the mother or whoever it was, pulling them back with such force, meant I could not relax. I needed to do something or I wouldn't rest. Karen looked perturbed as she followed me into the hallway, where I pulled on my purple tie-dye scarf and slouch hat. I looked over my shoulder. "It's fine. I'll be back in 10 minutes. She looked on with a perplexed expression. "It's fine," I assured her. "I need the walk to clear my head after the fall." "You could be concussed." "I'm fine." I batted away her comments with my hand. I stood for a second as she pulled out another tissue and let out an almighty sneeze. "Want me to pick you up some antihistamines?" "No, hate them. They make me drowsy." "Okay then." I opened the door and walked down the steps and onto the street. A slight wave of calm washed over me, but before long the nagging sensation was back. I needed to perform some sort of compulsion. I wasn't sure just walking would suffice. As I passed next door's house, I looked up at it. It was the same as ours, a 3-story Victorian building. I could see no sign of life through any of the windows. I counted each step I took until I reached 100, which brought me almost to the end of the street. I turned right and headed towards the mews, carefully avoiding all the cracks. Inside the grocery shop, I rearranged 3 jars of pickled onions and 2 cans of tomato soup on the shelf, picked up 2 pints of semi-skimmed milk, and headed to the counter. It was the same guy who had been serving me earlier.